This is The Rude Dog Show. Now, here's your host, Rudy Reyes.
Welcome to The Rude Dog Show. Good evening, everyone. Every single one. I hate to sound like Tiny Tim, but every one of you. Thank you for tuning in. This is Rudy Reyes, brought to you by Today's California, Today's Canada. And of course, to say the very least, we're going to be talking about the World Baseball Classic. But first, Metaverse, we're all over the place. Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and everywhere in between. This should be the same without my fantastic partner, Trophy Case. Most players are posting videos of workouts and on social media versus a concentrated location where scouting is really starting to look. And of course, Shohei Otani's appearance on the mound last night, as if anyone had tuned into the World Baseball Classic. Lord knows I was, and based on numbers, everybody else was as well. The largest game shown in the United States in recent memory, and to kind of go over that with me is JP Hoonstra. JP, how are you?
Rudy, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining me. We're on for about 15 minutes or so. You know, last night was an absolutely fantastic game. I watched that, and if any other American had any nails left on their fingers, God help them, because it was a nail biter throughout the entire game. The U.S. had their chances, but Shohei Otani, as he's done consistently, and of course now his first World Baseball Classic game, found his way not only into the hearts of millions of Japanese and Japanese Americans, as well as some Americans who weren't necessarily rooting for the U.S. Shame on you. And those who were just having a blast last night watching this soon-to-be duel. We'll jump into that. JP, last night was a fantastic game. I know you were glued to it. There had to be a certain level of stamina associated with Otani's breathing control, his stamina, what was going through his mind. Tell me what it looked like from your perspective as to what he looked like on the mound, and did he have that all in control and then some?
Yeah, I mean, there were two Shohei Otanis really throughout this whole tournament. There's the Shohei Otani who's about to deliver a pitch, or, you know, as only he can, also stand in the batter's box waiting for the pitcher to deliver. And then there was the guy in between moments who was more fired up than anybody I've ever seen, or at least more fired up than I've ever seen him. And I've seen him since the day he arrived with the Angels 5 years ago now. So that was a different Otani emotionally in between pitches. But once he got the ball, or once he stood in the batter's box, same guy, just like a bigger moment, really. And like you said, the biggest moment in his career, more people watching. Certainly facing Mike Trout in a 3-2 game with the championship on the line, that's as big as it gets.
Yeah, it doesn't get any better than that, I'll be honest with you. And the inevitable, what was going to happen. We ultimately had seen this unfold before it ever did. Both players were talked to and mentioned in regards to facing off against one another. What comments did you take away from either one of the players, whether it's Trout or Otani, because of that inevitable duel?
You know, they both echoed something that I've heard other guys say throughout the tournament. And I'm not on the ground in Miami. I'm here in LA. So it could be that if I went around the locker room, I would find a greater diversity of opinions on this. And, you know, there's that subjectivity bias where the sort of most, I don't want to say ostentatious, but, you know, the most dramatic quotes get repeated the most often. But like so many guys, Trout and Otani were included, saying that this was like the biggest moment that they've ever experienced in baseball, and or the most fun experience, or the biggest stage. And, you know, if you haven't played in the World Series, it's hard to disagree with that. Certainly Trout and Otani haven't been on that stage. Certainly neither of them have had this many eyes on them globally in a baseball game. So, you know, and I think that's maybe exceptional for guys who are as good at baseball as they are. Like if you're one of these guys from the Czech Republic or Israel, or you know, a Mexican native playing for Team Mexico who's never played in a semifinal anything against, you know, Team Japan, let alone you know, competition of that caliber. You know, this was, I think, for probably most guys in the WBC, the biggest moment that they have experienced, and to see them enjoy it, to see it almost universally just bring out the best in everybody who competed in the tournament really justified for me the tournament's existence. Like, forget the ratings, forget the atmosphere in the park, although by all accounts it was great. Just to see the players buying into it, to me, that legitimizes the whole enterprise, start to finish.
Yeah, it definitely did. It really encompassed everything that a World Series needed to be. And of course, when you start talking about the ball that Otani had hit, he did it against Australia, whereas the 3-run home run shot. That ball was being shared, and I don't think I've ever seen in a Major League Baseball game. And correct me if I'm wrong. Actually, share a ball, but then eventually go back to its owner. That's treated like Indiana Jones is trading the monkey for the sand. You know, which one is he going to take and try to do a switch show, change show act? And of course, it's LA, it's Hollywood. So I just think that he had seen his dominance early on. His MVP caliber type of play is something that Major League Baseball, I don't want to see necessarily is missing, but he certainly provides that necessary link to the Japanese culture, along with the American culture. And facing off against Mike Trout had to probably been the highlight of his entire career up to this point. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much said as much after the game yesterday. And we have to remember, too, how exceptional Shohei Otani is, right? It's not like there's 20 other guys in Japan who can pitch and hit to that degree. Like, he's one of one in Japan and in the world. So, and honestly, I think it would take that for an American audience to stand up and watch the way that they did in that championship game. And even, in the semifinal game against Mexico, I knew that drew a very big audience as well. To have the world's attention in the way that Shohei Otani did for a Japanese player, he's got to be doing something special. And certainly Shohei Otani is doing it not just in a way that no Japanese player has done before, but really in a way that arguably no baseball player has done since Babe Ruth. And even then, Babe Ruth only did it for basically a year where he was hitting full-time and pitching full-time. And I have read quotes from Babe Ruth after that 1 year period where he truly was a two-way player at the game's highest level, saying like, yeah, I don't think I could do it any longer than I did because it's really super hard. And clearly Ruth, he chose the right path, right? He was one of the game's best pitchers, but he was doing things as a hitter that nobody had done before and nobody did for a very long time thereafter. Otani's still doing it because he's still one of the game's best pitchers and one of the game's best hitters. So I don't really want to hold him up as exemplary of the Japanese culture because, yes, he's extremely respectful on the field. I think he carries himself with a certain dignity that very few players do. And I think to a degree that is reflective of the Japanese culture. There's a politeness, there's a respect there that to see a superstar like Otani carry in spite of the fact that he could, carry himself however he wants to, and he would still command respect from everybody in the game.
Right.
But he does. He's like
he commands respect without commanding it. It's a silence, right? The way that he nods, the way that he bows.
Right.
I'm familiar with the culture, and one thing that I do know about guys like there's obviously no one like him, but in the sense of having the honor, understanding what that actually means in the Japanese culture, how that's been kind of the mainstay for this Japanese club throughout the entire World Baseball Classic series leading up to the championship game. He went 6 for 12 with 8 RBIs, 7 walks in the batter's box. He recorded 3 doubles and a 448-foot home run. Obviously, it blew the lid right off of that Tokyo Dome. When I think of what he means to baseball, just globally, we would take MLB out of it. We could take the World Baseball Classic out of it, just baseball in general. I think he is one of those guys that will always be remembered for being probably one of the best two-way players that we've seen, as you stated, I'd say within the last decade, maybe ever.
Yeah, maybe ever. I mean, it's a very short list, right? At this point, you're looking at him, you're looking at Babe Ruth, you're looking at Martin Dihigo, the Cuban star from the 20s and 30s, who couldn't play Major League Baseball because of the color barrier, but by all accounts was really on par with Ruth in terms of what he could do as a pitcher and a hitter. And I think it's exemplary of that time period, right? That in the 20s and 30s, you could have guys who were still hanging on as two-way players you didn't expect to see it again, just because of how much dedication and skill, physical and mental, that it takes to be either a pitcher or a hitter at the game's highest level. But to see somebody doing it both, like, that alone commands the respect. Like, I don't care where you come from. It's almost mythical, really, because you just didn't expect to see it in our
I
life.
can almost call him a unicorn.
You wouldn't be
Japanese
alone.
style unicorn.
Yeah.
Maybe so. One thing I wanted to ask you while I still have you on, could Major League Baseball see themselves maybe diving more so into the Japanese circuit to get the guys, the Otani-esque type of players? And I know he's one of one, but could they really dive into that? Could clubs or Major League Baseball franchise as an organization kind of help steer teams that direction to draft guys like Otani?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you want to, to answer your question, I kind of want to reverse engineer that. Like, let's say that an Otani came up in the American baseball system. I think absolutely pro scouts would study, okay, what did this kid do at every step of his development? What sort of enabled him developmentally to be the player that he is today? And I think you'll see some of that go on from the scouting standpoint in Japan. In terms of Major League Baseball tapping into that talent, of course, they have a working agreement with NPB, the top league over there, whereby there's a posting system, and I believe it's 6 years as a professional that player would have to spend over in Japan before he's allowed to be posted and become a free agent with the full rights granted to any free agent coming over from Japan. The American team would pay a posting fee to the Japanese team. And Otani decided to forego that money because he wanted to come here early, right? So there are certain protocols in place, right, where Japan won't just allow American teams to raid their talent. But I think that there is absolutely something to be learned from, okay, well, what did the Japanese amateur system allow Shohei Otani to do to come up the way that he did as a two-way star? And I don't know if that can be replicated, but I would like to think that there's something that can be learned there, sure.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. When you see something that works, you talk about the NFL being a copycat league, and I still believe MLB also has a little skosh of that up their sleeve, if you will, being a copycat organization to go with what works and to avoid those things that will ultimately lead you to a pitfall where there is no oxygen to take waiting for you on the other side. One thing I wanted to note here is that Otani in 2022 is 8th in the majors. He's tied with Logan Webb from the Giants, Luis Garcia of the Astros, Chris Bassett of the Mets, and Tyler Anderson of the Dodgers. Of course, I love those freeway series. Of course, growing up, I remember going to a couple of those. What can Otani do to get above that ERA of 2.33 to where he just takes control and no longer wedged between guys aforementioned to take that lead in his ERA?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, ERA specifically, it's somewhat dependent on the team behind you. And I think, you can't answer that question without saying, he's got to have some luck. He's got to have a good defense. But I think beyond that, it's just do what he did in this WBC as a pitcher over the course of a full season. Like, easier said than done, right? Can he actually pump 102-mile-per-hour fastballs from April to September and still, in his mind, he's trying to prepare for October to be ready in the postseason? I don't know. He's never done that before. That 102-mile-per-hour pitch, it's the fastest he's ever thrown in baseball, at least recorded by radar guns. So I don't know. That'll be interesting. But he's been working on the two-seamer. He hasn't had that pitch for a full season in his back pocket. Combine that with a 102-mile-per-hour four-seamer, the slider that you saw him use to strike out Mike out on 3-2. That stuff is just about as good as anybody, and he hasn't had that full arsenal over a full season yet. So I would just say stay healthy, stay consistent, stay on the field, and get a little good luck from your defense. And he could be one of the best pitchers in baseball this year, hands down.
Sure, absolutely. I bet you John Smoltz was shuddering in his seat when he seen him throw that filthy, Flarnin filth ball down on the left-hand part of the mound. It just had me reeling, thinking to myself, is there anything this kid can't do? He can throw it all. He can hit it all. And he's basically done it all up to this point, minus obviously winning a World Series. I don't know if the Angels is an organization that he can do that in. And I say that, and I'll preface it by saying this, that Otani found himself being in conversation of being traded and ownership. Talk about selling off the LA Angels of Anaheim. I thought to myself, no way. You can't do this. This is not plausible. How special is he to the Angels?
Well, obviously very special because they've chosen not to trade him yet, even though, in all my reporting, there's at least 29 teams, right, that would love to have him. And so teams have tried to pry Otani from the Angels. I know of at least one team that has had an offer on paper to the Angels to trade for Shohei Otani, but their owner, Artie Moreno, has said on the record that as long as the team is in playoff contention, he's not going to trade him. And, like you said, can the Angels keep Shohei Otani and contend for a World Series? I don't know. I wouldn't consider them one of the best teams in the American League as of today. It's not as if they have a bunch of assets that they can trade from to make the team around him better. They remind me a lot of the Giants in the 90s and the 2000s with Barry Bonds, where, clearly Bonds was better than any other hitter in the league. And yet to put a winning team on the field around him, Giants only made the World Series once in all of his time there, and they came just short. Barry Bonds retired without having won a World Series, and you don't want to have to say the same about Shohei Otani in 10 years, but it's hard to see him getting there on the Angels. I think you're right. Now, will he choose to re-sign in Anaheim after the season? That's another question.
Another question for another show. We'll probably talk about that some other point later on. As the season progresses, of course, opening day is just a little over a week away. Last question for you, and we're going to stay with Otani because clearly he is the piece and the cog that just keeps things moving. I think is going to help facilitate bringing even more talent to the Angels and, of course, talent to Major League Baseball overall in general. Now that Japan's back on top of the baseball world, given they haven't won a title since 2009, and I guess the two-part question is will they stay there? Or would they need to regroup heading into the 2026 World Baseball Classic to take it again?
Well, you got to take the tournament for what it is, right? It's an every 3 years tournament. The talent that you are able to get on that, 26-person roster is dependent on a lot of things, who's healthy in that moment, who is in a position where they are able to break free from their team, whatever professional team that may be, to compete in the WBC. And do we know that the 2026 WBC is even going to be in March? I don't know, because if so, you would have to ask, well, are the Japanese players who are in Major League spring training camps able to break free? Not all of them were this year. So you look at factors like that, not just for Japan, but for every other team who intends to compete in the WBC. What talent can they get in that year? And it's not totally a crapshoot. I think, if anything, the talent level's just gone up year after year. And we saw, especially with the U.S. team, the buy-in among the hitters. Japan really hasn't had that problem. They're probably going to get the best 26 guys more or less, just depending on who happens to be in a Major League spring training camp that year. So I like their chances to repeat. This is the third time that they've been in a WBC final. You have to believe that they'll do everything that they can to get back in 2026. But it's a short tournament too, and anything can happen. Mexico nearly knocked them off in the semifinals. So it's a short tournament. It's a fun tournament. Anything can happen, but Japan certainly, as much as any team, does its best to try to win it every year.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if they wait till 2026, and I know it's 3 years away, if this was done annually, it would blow the lid off of everything. I mean, it would just be a constant. I think that ownership, front office, the commissioner need to really go back to this and say, hey, look, this is what we had this year. If we do it every year, imagine how many more people in various languages that can be reached with this broadcast. Little kids all over the country, not to suggest that it wasn't already, but even more for as far as that's concerned. Last but not least, is Yu Darvish getting a bum rap because he wasn't the guy in the ninth inning fighting off against Mike Trout at the plate?
I mean, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't know if the Japanese manager was asked about that or if he was asked about it in English, because I don't know Japanese. So it could have been a strategic decision based on matchups. I really don't know. It's one game, it's one inning. Those things are quite fickle in baseball. But I think once the regular season gets rolling, if Yu Darvish, shows that for some reason like he was off his game and that's why they didn't start him and that's why they didn't use him as the closer, then ad hoc reasoning, but like maybe that'll justify the decision not to use him in that situation. I don't know. He's one of the best pitchers in baseball, and reputationally, in terms of the career, and in terms of the 6-year contract he just got. I'm not too worried about Yu Darvish yet. I think he'll be just fine.
Yeah, I'm not out on Yu Darvish. I want to see him just perform at the plate, keep his pace, play his game, and work in concert with the back catcher to really make things poppin' for him as the season rolls on. JP, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And the article, by the way, you posted, I had to reshare it. I read that thing from top to bottom. Absolutely fantastic work.
Thank you. You're my best retweeter, Rudy. And
hey, I do my best. That's all I can do. Thanks, JP. I appreciate it. And have fun in LA, because I know it's raining here. I don't know that it's raining there, but
in parts, it was raining when I drove out to the studio, but not right now.
Fair enough. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Take care, man. Thanks.
You too. Thank you. Yeah, that was fantastic, man. Love having JP Hoonstra on. It was fabulous. He, tons of insight, tons of great information. Love his input. Love his thought process. I just think there's so much. And yeah, no, you're right. It's a quiet confidence. And you're right, LinkedIn user, whoever you are. Thank you for chiming in. But really good stuff from JP. We're going to have him back on at some juncture. But I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in. This is Rudy Reyes of the Rude Dog Show. Don't forget to go to trophycase.app. If you're a player, it's fine to send videos and your huddle film and all of that. That's wonderful. And I'm glad you're doing it. To make that even more impactful, download trophycase.app, build your profile, because if you build it, they will come. They will look for you. That's what this is about. And this is Rudy Reyes on TheRudeDogShow.com. It'll be posted on TheRudeDogShow.com as well. Hey, you know what? Throw me a follow while you're at it. Add Rude Dog Reyes. Love talking sports of all kinds. Love having a special guest just like JP Hoonstra on the show. So stay tuned for more. This is Rudy Reyes. Have a great evening. Thanks for taking 30 minutes of your time. Have a great night.